Hello and welcome to today's video, where we are going to talk about 5 different aspects that you have to take in consideration when buying a new violin, viola, cello or double bass. There are some differences between the instruments. There are things that are valid for a violin but not for a double bass, for instance, but I will let you know. First of all, we will start with the most obvious, which is the price. As with everything, what you pay is what you get. That means that as products become more expensive, they become also better. But that is not always completely true. Also, do you need to buy the most expensive instrument that you can afford? Or is maybe an instrument that it is a bit cheaper good enough? When you are starting to play an instrument, it is a good idea not to spend a lot of money buying an instrument because maybe you don't like it so much and you want to stop, and then you have an instrument that you might be able to sell but maybe for less money than you paid at the beginning. On the other hand, don't buy the cheapest you can find because these tend to sound horrible, and then you might think that playing an instrument is not nice for you or is not what you were thinking, but that is not because you cannot do it or you don't play good enough, but because the instrument has a very bad sound. The prices that I'm going to mention are not valid for the whole world. Of course, there are differences in currencies, there are differences in availability of instruments, but today you can order a lot of things also from other countries. You will have to spend also some money on shipping. But I will say some prices just to have a guideline. In my opinion, as a beginner, you should not spend more than 500 euro for a violin or a viola, 800 to 1000 euro for a cello, and between 1000 and 1500 for a double bass. On the other hand, don't go too low, and we are going to see why not in the other 4 tips that I'm going to talk about in a while. If you are a beginner and you have the possibility to rent an instrument close to where you live, consider doing that. That gives you the possibility to play on an instrument for half a year or a year. Some companies have a minimum period of renting. So you can try it, and if you like it, you can buy an instrument afterwards. And if you don't like it, you can give it back and you have not spent so much money. Tip number 2 is materials. Which materials are made both instruments of, and what you should avoid. As you might have seen in the violin making series, where I'm making a violin from scratch, both instruments are made from maple for the back, the ribs and the scroll. This is the back, the ribs and the scroll. From spruce for the top, and ebony for the fingerboard. Sometimes you could also find instruments that are made in triplex or multiplex. For double basses, that is normal. The most budget double basses are made of multiplex. They use multiplex because a piece like that of maple or spruce without any nods of good quality, or at least good enough quality to use for a bowed instrument, is very difficult to find and is very expensive. That means that the cheapest instruments that can be made from solid wood are pretty expensive. You can find double basses made from multiplex that sound pretty good, so it's not a big problem. For violins and violas, I would recommend not to buy an instrument made of multiplex. For cellos, it's a bit of an in-between situation. I have seen instruments made of multiplex that sounded pretty good, more a bit older instruments made in the 60s or 70s. But if you can afford an instrument that is made from solid wood, I would prefer to do that. Then we have the fingerboard, which is a very important part of the instrument. Normally the fingerboard is made from ebony. I can show you here a fingerboard for a cello. And this is not painted black, ebony is black. Better qualities ebony are very dark black. A bit lower quality might have some brown parts in it, that's not a very big problem. Sometimes they tend to paint the ebony fingerboard to make it even darker, that's also not a problem. The problem is when a fingerboard is made out of hardwood. Hardwood might be maple or even softer kinds of wood, which are white. That doesn't work very good because these kinds of wood are very sensitive to humidity. That means that as weather becomes drier or more humid, the fingerboard, especially this part, will move up or down. And that will result in very difficult to play or buzzing. Mostly when you buy an instrument, in the description of the instrument they write if they have used ebony or hardwood. If you find instruments with hardwood, try to avoid them. If the pegs are not ebony, they might be rosewood, although rosewood is used less because of the CITES. They could also be boxwood or pear or plum. These are all fine. Avoid hardwood pegs as they also move with humidity a lot and they get too stuck or you cannot tune the instrument. The tail pieces, sometimes they are made from ebony, that's fine. Other times they are made of kind of plastic or synthetic materials, like the one that I'm using on this instrument. This is a Wittner tailpiece, they work very well. Sometimes you can find them from metal. These tend to be a bit heavier. If they are made of aluminum, then it's also not a big problem. The only problem that you could have with a tailpiece which has the fine tuners in it is that if it's low quality, the fine tuners won't work so well anymore. If they break, change the tailpiece and put a Wittner one. These work perfectly. If you want to know more about the tailpieces, have a look to my video, which will appear here, where I spoke about the tailpiece. Number 3, the strings. Before I go ahead with point number 3, I wanted to point out that this video is not sponsored by any of the brands that I'm going to name or that I've already named. This video is made possible by my Patreons, which I want to thank very much for supporting my channel. And if you also appreciate my content and would like to support my channel, don't hesitate to visit my Patreon page, the link is in the description. Often when you order an instrument online, it is mounted with very cheap steel strings. These strings are very thin and have a very hard, unpleasant sound. There are two things that you could do, or try to find instruments that are already mounted with better kinds of strings. And mostly you can read about that in the description, because as soon as they use branded strings, they write it. Brands like Tomastic, Pirastro, D'Addario, Jager, Larsen, Warschau, Gali are all good brands and make good quality strings. You could definitely change the strings that are on the instrument that you bought with one of these. This can make a very big difference in the sound. Also, if you put very bad strings on a nice instrument, you will totally kill the sound. Number 4 is the bow. High quality bows are made of a wood that is called Pernambuco or Fernambuco. This kind of wood comes from Brazil and is the optimal kind of wood to make bows, as it is very elastic and hard enough. For a bit cheaper bows, bows for students, they use another kind of wood which is called Brazil wood. This wood is also elastic as Pernambuco, but tends to lose its elasticity after 5 to 10 years. Pernambuco can keep until 100 years. Then I have seen a lot of bows that are made of all other kinds of woods. Some of them are completely not elastic and are already straight when you buy them. I can show you an example. This bow, as you see, although it's loosened, there is no tension on the hair. It is already almost straight. It should be like that, touching in the middle the table. Like this bow. This is a violin bow, is a bit longer, this is a cello bow, but the principle is the same. As you see here in the middle, it almost touches the table. This one is already straight. That means that you cannot put too much tension on it. It keeps bending and bending. Other differences, but these are a bit harder to see, not so important, is that the frog, this part, let me put this away. The frog, this part, has to fit very well onto the stick. Then it doesn't move, but it moves nice backwards and forwards, but it doesn't move left and right. Part number 5, the last one, is the question that I receive the most often when people come to a shop to ask and to inform about an instrument. Should you buy a new one or an old one? And this is a question that can go two directions. Mostly when people are selling an instrument, they think that the older the instrument, the more expensive it is. And when they are buying an instrument, they think that an older instrument is second-hand, so it could be cheaper. But none of these is correct. Firstly, instruments don't become cheaper as they become second-hand. Violins, violas, cellos and double basses keep their value also when they are used, because their sound doesn't change. And for the budget instruments, and I'm talking about instruments under 5,000 euro, you are buying sound, quality. If an instrument is played for 5 or 10 years, its sound quality doesn't go down, so there is no reason for it to become cheaper. At the other side, instruments don't get more expensive only because they get older. I have had clients that told me that they had an instrument of grandma or grandpa and it should be expensive because it was very old. But that's not how it works. It is true that old instruments are expensive, but then we are talking about the old historic instruments. That doesn't mean that every instrument is expensive just because it became older. Expensive instruments remain expensive also when they become older, and cheap instruments remain cheap also when they become older. Now, should you buy a new or an old one? There is no answer to this question. The only difference that you could keep in mind is that a new instrument is brand new and has no repairs on it. That means that these repairs that are not there will not give any problems. Sometimes you can find an old instrument which has no repairs. I have some instruments that are 50, 60 years old and have no repairs, so they are as new, also no problem. And you have some other instruments that have had some accidents, like this one. This is an instrument that I have repaired and I have made a video about this repair. You can see it here. This instrument had a couple of cracks. I have repaired them, I have glued them, everything is okay. The only problem with this is that these cracks could open again, but not this year or next year, maybe in 10 or 15 years. So when you are buying an older instrument that could have some repairs that have been done 15, 20, 25 years ago, these might give some small problems. But that doesn't mean that you have to avoid this instrument. It could sound very good, and especially for cellos, elder cellos have a lot of damage. These are big instruments and it's easy to bump it somewhere. So that's a little bit the difference between old and new instruments. These are the tips that I could give you when you are considering to buy an instrument. I hope that I helped you a bit. If you still have questions, don't hesitate to leave a comment below. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks again to the Patreons for supporting my channel. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video, and I will see you next time again. Bye bye!